They said the storm brought more than snow that Christmas Eve. It brought silence, and something else. Margaret Lawson had always cherished Christmas. This year, however, the season's traditions served only as painful reminders of what she had lost. This was their first Christmas without Henry Lawson, Margaret's husband of 23 years. His sudden passing in the spring had left a void that none of them could fill. In the adjoining room, her son, Nathan, sits hunched over a sketchpad. His pencil moves swiftly across the page, creating dark, jagged lines that form a figure indistinct yet unnerving. He barely glances up as his younger sister, Lucy, bursts into the room, her face flushed from the cold. Lucy, at 16, carried the kind of energy that often masked deeper fears. Her laughter still filled the room, but it no longer lingered the way it once had. Lucy holds up a snow globe she found in a box of decorations, shaking it to stir the glitter inside. Nathan's eyes flicker to the globe, then back to his sketch. For Nathan, 22, grief had taken a quieter, more insular form. His sketches spoke in ways he no longer could. Harold, the closest neighbor, had lived in the valley for decades. He carried stories, ones that blended history and legend, tales that had a way of lodging themselves in the mind long after they were told. Inside, Harold shares one such story. Though his words are unheard, his expressions grow animated. Margaret smiles politely, but her eyes dart to the window as if searching for something outside. The cabin had been Henry's idea, a place to retreat from the noise of the world. This year, it felt more like a refuge from something unspoken. Margaret excuses herself and steps out onto the porch. The snow crunches beneath her boots as she gazes at the woods. Something catches her eye, tracks in the snow, faint and winding, circling the cabin before disappearing into the trees. Her breath catches, but she says nothing as she re-enters the house. It was small at first. Subtle. Details overlooked or dismissed as coincidence. Have you ever noticed something that didn't quite feel right, but couldn't explain why? Share your experiences in the comments. Lucy retreats to her room, where she notices frost creeping across the window pane in delicate, jagged patterns. She traces it with her finger, but freezes when she hears a faint knock at the glass. She turns, expecting to see Nathan or Margaret, but the hallway is empty. Lucy convinced herself it was nothing, just the wind playing tricks on her mind. But doubts, once planted, rarely stay buried. Downstairs, Margaret begins placing gifts beneath the tree when her hand falters. She picks up a small package she doesn't remember wrapping. The tag reads, "To Margaret, love, Henry." Her breathing quickens as she turns the package over in her hands. It's wrapped in a distinct paper she remembers from last Christmas, one she hadn't brought to the cabin. What would you do if you found a gift from someone no longer alive? Let us know in the comments. Nathan enters the room, breaking Margaret's trance. She quickly tucks the package under the tree, her smile too quick to be convincing. By morning, the storm would cover the tracks in the snow. But some marks cannot be erased so easily. The faint whispers return, this time growing louder. The storm had shown no signs of relenting by the next evening. Snow draped the cabin like a suffocating shroud, muting the world beyond its walls. Inside, the family moved through their routines with a growing sense of disquiet. By the second night, Nathan's drawings had taken on a life of their own. Each stroke of his pencil seemed to conjure something unseen, something that lingered just beyond the edges of comprehension. Nathan sat at the kitchen table, his sketchpad illuminated by the flickering glow of the fireplace. His latest drawing depicted a towering figure with obscured features, its form stretching unnaturally, as though it refused to be contained by the page. He paused, staring at the lines as though he hadn't been the one to draw them. From across the room, Lucy watched him with a mixture of fascination and unease. In the living room, Margaret arranged the last of the decorations on the Christmas tree. As she stepped back to admire her work, her eyes landed on an ornament she didn't remember placing. It was a simple silver bell with a frayed red ribbon, one she distinctly recalled packing away after her husband's funeral. Her breath hitched as she reached for it. The ornament shouldn't have been there. Margaret knew this, yet there it was, gleaming softly in the firelight like a memory refusing to stay buried. Her hand trembled as she lifted the bell from the branch. A faint chime echoed through the room, impossibly loud against the muffled storm outside. She placed it down and walked away, unwilling to dwell on its sudden reappearance. What would you do if a forgotten keepsake reappeared without explanation? Let us know in the comments. That evening, the family gathered around the fireplace, joined by Harold, whose presence felt increasingly intrusive despite his outward warmth. His stories, once a comfort, now carried a heavier tone. Harold spoke of old legends passed down through generations, tales of unseen visitors who thrived in the cracks of grief and silence. But one story, in particular, seemed to settle over the room like a shadow. Harold leaned forward, his voice lower now. He told of the silent watchers, spectral figures said to haunt families consumed by sorrow during the holiday season. These entities, he claimed, did not harm outright but lingered, feeding on the emotions of those who couldn't let go of their pain. Margaret forced a smile, brushing off the tale as folklore, but her eyes betrayed her unease. Lucy, on the other hand, clutched her knees, visibly shaken. Have you ever heard a legend or story that stayed with you long after it was told? Share your experience. Later that night, as the family slept, Lucy woke to a faint noise outside her window. The whispers were clearer now, like voices carried on the wind. She pressed her ear to the cold glass, trying to make sense of the words. The whispers didn't form sentences, but one phrase rose above the rest. For words, repeated like a refrain, "Let him go." Her pulse quickened as she stumbled back, knocking over the snow globe on her bedside table. It hit the floor with a soft thud, the glass miraculously unbroken. She scrambled to her door, too afraid to stay alone but unwilling to wake the others. In the hallway she paused. Frost had formed on the windows along the corridor, and in the center of each pane, a message had been scrawled by an unseen hand. "Do not answer." Downstairs, the family dog Max began to bark. The sound was frantic, unlike his usual temperament. Margaret rushed to the door, finding him pacing and growling at something in the distance. She strained her eyes against the darkness, but saw nothing beyond the swirling snow. Max refused to go outside, his growls intensifying as though warning of something no one else could see. To Margaret, it was just another sign that something was wrong, though she couldn't yet admit it. Nathan appeared behind her, his face pale. Without a word, he held up his latest drawing. It was the figure again, its shadowed form now accompanied by what looked like faint outlines of bells in the background. Margaret shut the door quickly, drawing the curtains as though it might keep whatever was out there at bay. The next morning, Harold's behavior had shifted. He seemed nervous, pacing near the windows and glancing at the tree line. When pressed, he admitted to Margaret that he'd heard the whispers too. Harold's confession cracked the fragile sense of normalcy the family had been clinging to. He spoke of his own loss, of a Christmas long ago when the Watchers had visited his home. His family had not listened to the warnings, and they had paid the price. Margaret's resolve faltered. She began to question whether staying in the cabin was the right choice, but the storm showed no signs of letting up. Harold's eyes grew wild as he urged them to leave, his voice rising in desperation. That night, the family huddled in the living room, the fire their only source of light. The whispers had grown louder, undeniable now. Margaret clutched the silver bell in her hands, its chime barely audible above the storm. The Lawson family was no longer alone in the cabin. Whether the Watchers were real or merely the manifestations of their collective grief didn't matter anymore. The storm was closing in, and with it came a truth they could no longer ignore. What do you think is happening to the Lawsons? Share your theories in the comments below. The storm battered the cabin with relentless force, shaking the windows as the family gathered in the living room. Margaret's hands gripped the silver bell, its metallic chill anchoring her amidst the chaos. Nathan's latest sketch lay on the table, a dark figure now fully rendered, its jagged edges seemingly reaching out from the page. Margaret had made her decision. They would leave as soon as the storm let up. But even plans forged in desperation can be shattered in an instant. A sudden knock echoed through the cabin, sharp and deliberate. The family froze, each glance filled with unspoken questions. Margaret moved toward the door, her footsteps slow and hesitant. When she opened it, no one stood on the porch, only a small gift box, carefully wrapped and dusted with snow. She brought it inside, her hands trembling as she untied the ribbon. Inside lay a photograph of the family from the previous Christmas. Margaret stared at it, her breath hitching as her husband's face came into focus, or rather, the absence of it. His image had been crudely scratched away, leaving only a blank space. The message was clear. This wasn't an offering. It was a warning. Lucy clutched her brother's arm, her whispered plea breaking the silence. "We have to leave now." But as Margaret looked back toward the door, the storm outside seemed impenetrable. Harold's earlier words echoed in her mind. Some grief, if held too tightly, will consume everything else. As the cabin grew quieter, the whispers that had once seemed distant now filled the room. They swirled around them, indecipherable yet suffocating. Nathan's sketchpad lay open, the figure now joined by smaller, ghostly outlines. The family exchanged panicked glances as the fire dimmed, leaving only shadows. By morning, the storm would pass, but the cabin would stand empty, its secrets buried beneath the snow. What do you think happened to the Lawsons? Leave your theories in the comments below. You want us to complete the story? Hit the like button, as massive engagement will show us you love the story and drive us to complete it as more people want to watch it. Love unraveling mysteries like this one? Hit subscribe and turn on notifications for more chilling tales. Don't forget to share your thoughts below.